Have you ever wondered what life would be like if you looked at it from a different perspective? What could you learn by opening your mind to other ideas and other concepts? Who would you become if you welcomed the possibilities and embraced new opportunities? Hi, everyone. I'm Denise Stegall, your host of the Wonder Series, where we offer you each week the opportunity to think outside the box and wonder how you can create the life you have always desired. The Wonder Series is sponsored by Living Healthy List, and you can find us at livinghealthylist.com. This weekly interview series features world-class experts in various areas of health, wellness, personal development, and bringing a little bit more fun into life, each who inspire you with their insight and their wisdom. And here you will receive tips and proven strategies that you can use right away. We are here to excite, engage, educate, but more importantly, to empower you to become the person you have always intended to be, who you have always dreamed that you can be, and to create that healthy, happy, purpose-filled life that you want to live. A new episode of the Wonder Series is released every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and you can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and Google Podcasts. And hey, if you like what you hear, please subscribe and give the Wonder Series a 5-star rating. And then while you're there, please make sure that you tell your friends about us too. So welcome to the Wonder Series, where we want you to start wondering and start living. My guest today is Nurieli. She is a dispute resolution conflict coach, mediator, facilitator, and trainer. This is going to be really cool, guys. She runs a team of conflict management experts who help individuals and organizations navigate challenges, and I love this, shift from harm to harmony. Kira, hi, welcome to the Wonder Series. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Denise.
Tell us a little bit about who Kira is and what you do in your business and with your clients.
Great. So I am certified in alternative dispute resolution. So what that means is all types of systems that are alternatives to the classic litigious, legal model that prevails certainly in the West, but in the United States especially. People typically think of conflict and they jump into, how they might pursue a legal action against someone. And the truth is there are a lot of different steps before you necessarily need to head into that. And let's not be naive that many cases, of course, do warrant legal formal action because, due to the severity or the nature of what is involved. But oftentimes conflicts can be guided in a somewhat more peaceful, somewhat perhaps less stressful process to get what people are really seeking. And one thing, for example, I know that your podcast series is all about holistic well-being. And one thing is, in our legal system, there is a lot of focus on justice and not as much focus on healing. So one of the things that we do in our practice, where we explore other dispute resolution systems and we help people navigate through their conflicts, is how they may feel better through that process. So it's not just about whether or not they seek an attorney or whether they decide they do want to have their situation even just arbitrated, which is at least a little bit less, face-to-face, in the courts. That this process can focus on the emotions underneath conflicts or I should say these processes, right? They can talk about the emotions, they can talk about the relationship dynamics, and again, help shift into perhaps a more positive interaction, a positive dynamic. One of the things that had occurred to me when I had first started dabbling in this field was that when you start to head into a formal legal process, usually that breaks the relationship altogether. People don't typically maintain any relationship whatsoever after they go to court, but sometimes there's a real need or interest in maintaining the relationship but there's a struggle with how to do that while also appropriately addressing the dynamics that are creating tensions or that are not working for one party or perhaps even both. And that's where we can come in. We can help maintain the relationship and address the conflicts in a very proactive way.
That is so important, because I think you're right. So often there's a conflict, there's a problem, and there's a complete break. And there's angst and anger, and there's really no way to get back to that. But if people can find a way to avoid that, how much, oh gosh, how much happier, how much calmer would all of these conflicts be in someone's world. And we're going to come across conflict in our relationships, whether it's with our family, with our jobs, our organizations, and it's the way the way that conversation happens, whether it's you with the organization, the litigator, the court, or somebody who's really there to kind of mediate. I think more often people don't understand what mediation is and why that third party is really helpful.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is, when you hire an attorney, that is a third party as well. And the principle is that in conflict, we typically are overwhelmed with an emotional manifestation of what's going on. And oftentimes that actually again, it plays out in our body functions, our hormones. We have increased cortisol levels, where our bodies and minds are being hijacked into this fight or flight mode. And that's not where we're going to do our best thinking. That's not where we're going to do our best processing. So that's why it makes sense to have an attorney. The attorney is not as emotionally hijacked and can help us through that process. Sometimes people seek therapists or counselors for that same reason, right? Because they can be this outside neutral. And that neutral really means that they're just not emotionally attached to the process or to the results. And being detached a little bit emotionally is what can help. And so having a third party who can help us either by being that neutral or by helping us guide to a place where we can process things is why there's value there. So as a conflict coach, yes, I can create some pause and some awareness about different perspectives, but also I can help people slow down and calm. I like that you use the word calm or even self-soothe in a way, so that they can then do their higher thinking and they can process best. Oftentimes people get hooked on a story and have a difficult time unhooking from that. And it can take an outside third party, an outside perspective to map out, well, what if there could be different stories? And maybe try out and test out in a safe space, in a confidential manner. Well, what if this person were involved? Or what would this other person say about the situation? And those kinds of questions, those strategic questions that we know how to ask and we know how to frame them, really help people create breakthroughs so that they can unhook from the story, or at least unhook from that worst case scenario story that they're often inadvertently committing themselves to, and instead shift into some more proactive, positive outcome types of stories that can get them a little bit more excited, perhaps, or able to engage with less trepidation than before. And I should address, by the way, that excitement component. Actually, there have been documented like research-based studies on different cultural models and approaches to conflict. And one thing also that was discovered is that women and men, I mean, not that I'm necessarily hard and fast into the stereotypes, but those biologically who are female and those biologically who are male often relate to conflicts differently. Now, those could be culturally based as well, right? The gender stereotypes. However, whether it's culturally based or whether or not, there is some documentation that women typically view conflict with a lot more negativity than men, and therefore see negotiation, the idea of negotiation, as something that they fear or they do not look forward to than men. Men often can define negotiation in somewhat positive terms, like a football game, something where you're actually kind of challenged to be your best, where women define it as like a visit to the dentist. You're just kind of dealing with the pain. There's nothing you can do. You just got to like brace yourself for this painful process, right? And that can really affect the outcome, is the truth. If you have a little bit of excitement, yes, the football game, it's going to kind of push you to your limits, but you can feel ready for it. You can feel poised, and you can feel like, you know what, I'm just going to dig in and do my best. Then the outcomes can look radically different than if you're already preparing and expecting a difficult, upsetting process.
Oh, absolutely. I could see that. And it's so true. Even the way, my husband and I look at things, he's very, I hate to say cut and dry, but he's very matter of fact. This is the way it is. This is what it is. This is what we could do. And we could do this, or we could do this, where I can get a lot more emotional about it. And therefore kind of ambivalent. And I think that for me, and maybe that's something that women tend to, maybe that's a feeling that they get more than men. But I do, when I'm afraid of something, or the conflict, I get ambivalent. What is it that I actually want, or how do I want this to be resolved? Do I want A or do I want B? Where he's just like, okay, well, these are the choices. It's A or B. And I go, well, I kind of like A, but I kind of like B, but I don't know. And that's just, everyday silly stuff, and, that you deal with, in a home with a spouse.
Sure.
So I can see where, some ambivalence, fear and ambivalence really could lead women down a path where the emotion just runs very, very high, where with the men, it's much more even keeled, even with the excitement of the football game.
Sure. Well, look, ambivalence and certainty in and of themselves are not like one is better than the other. Ambivalence can mean you're actually open to listening. You're a little bit more curious about where things may head. The question is whether that ambivalence can lead to either paralysis, where then no choice is made, or whether it means that some other voice, some other person will simply dominate and choose for you, in which case you really haven't been able to choose powerfully, right? And then, of course, the flip side is if you're too directive, then you may not be really carefully considering all the different options and how they may play out, right? So there's pros and cons to each. The question is where that ambivalence may be working against you, and what then is the root cause of it, right? Is it that you truly are just not sure and you'd like to wait and hold on to, until a certain point where the solution will simply show itself? Or is it that you're actually, like you said, fearful of some sort of result, in which case then there's a question of, well, how might you or anyone, right, unpack that fear, or what's underneath that fear? Is that a crippling fear? In which case, how do you get your needs met, so that you will be able to be proactive, be productive, etc.
When someone comes to you and is, say, ambivalent, like I just described, is it, I know how I feel, but I don't know how people would perceive the way I look, am I presenting myself a certain way? Do women actually, or men, present themselves in a specific way when they do have that ambivalence or fear?
So typically when people come to me, if they're uncertain of what to do, they really haven't been able to sit in the conflict and map out what's going on, who it affects, what's particularly troubling to them, and why. And those are really important questions to ask either yourself or to have someone like guide you through that process, because The ambivalence is typically that you're staying at some sort of surface level in the conflict and not digging deep into understanding all of the different nuances. And listen, we're never going to understand all of the nuances, right? But all of the different things, factors that are involved, but especially like the big ticket items that are causing any sort of feelings of hurt or pain. And sometimes, by the way, again, that is a physical feeling.
Sure.
Sometimes people have a conflict and they physically feel tension in their neck, they feel a pit in their stomach. And those signs can really help you understand, wow, okay, that physical pain, that is related to something emotional going on in me. Like, let's go in there, let's figure this out, because you might solve the problem, meaning on a surface level, but as long as that tension, that pain remains underneath the surface, you haven't really healed. And that's why I'm talking about, listen, we're not therapists. Conflict coaches are not therapists, but just like any coach, people can come away actually feeling better, right? They feel more proactive, they feel more excited. Again, they can focus better. Like, oftentimes we're derailed in our attentions when we have a conflict. We can't focus on our work, we can't focus on our families. We're so consumed with the ruminating about what if this and did I do that, and all of that prevents us from just really being our best selves through life, right? So carving out time to really deep dive into what is happening will ultimately save you time later on, will help free you so that you can focus on these other things later. And that's something that people don't often realize when they think like, you know what, I'll just deal with this, don't worry about it, I'll just let things lie. That's fine if they truly in their whole selves can embody that, but most people do not.
Yeah.
Most people say that, but that is a surface level band-aid. And so, I mean, look, even in my own life, I'm human too, right? I have conflicts too. Even in my own life, I do my best to reflect and think, am I best off addressing this now, or am I best off pausing and addressing it later? How might it affect my day if I don't address it now? Or how might it affect my day if I dive in too quickly and don't pause to consider, right? There's a lot of different ways and there's no one answer. And by the way, I would say that that's the biggest, I guess, misunderstanding about what I do is people often turn to me and say, okay, Kira, I don't have a solution. What's your advice or what's your solution?
Yep.
And the truth is my solution is never the solution, right? My solution would be about what it triggers in me and what it means for me. But your situation is going to be different. Your relationships are going to be different. Your reputation is going to be, right? You mentioned in organizations, that is a huge deal. People are very concerned, as they should be, about their professional relationship, about their career. What would happen if they do X as opposed to what would happen if they do Y? And I can't decide that for them, right? And so it's, they'll come to me, see, ostensibly looking for like the answer, not realizing that the true answer, the true best answer is simply being guided into a process where the individual processes, well, what is your best answer? Right? What is really going on so that we can figure out what is the best answer for you and for your situation. And typically the answers do present themselves. People do figure out, I really think that having this conversation is the best bet. I'm going to talk to this person about it. Right. And then they'll turn to me and they'll say, thank you for telling me to do that. And I'll be like, oh, I didn't tell you to do that, but okay.
That to me is the beauty of coaching, where people, and the same thing, with what I do with health and life coaching, is people want to know, like, the question, like, there's always, what is the best diet, or what is the best exercise? And the answer always is the best diet is the best food that you will eat. Okay, I always say it's eat real food, but it's the food that you will eat, like the healthy food that you will eat. If you don't like kale, do not buy a pound and a half of kale and try to like choke it down. Same thing with exercise. It's like, and people will ask me, tell me. And you're right, as a coach, it's so important to ask those questions. And so I love that. That's such a big part of what you do. And I can see, years ago, I had a challenge with a company that I worked with, and thought about this and went to somebody who I thought would be able to understand where I was coming from. I didn't want to make a big deal about the situation, but I thought it was important for somebody to know. Well, it blew up and they had to tell somebody and they told someone. And so there was a confidence, to me, there was a confidence that was broken. And I look back now and understand why. When you're in an organization, there is a chain of command. And in this particular situation, at the time, I wasn't happy with it because I was kind of put in a bad position. But that bad position gave me or opened space for me to say, okay, is this an organization that I really want to work for? Is this a safe situation for me? Turned out it was not.
Wow.
And so it really did open a whole different avenue for me. I can honestly look back now and say, I went to my boss who went to HR and HR had to do their thing. I understand that now, but at 24, that was really hard to understand. Had I had said, if we had had an opportunity to have that third party, even if it was just me going and talking to someone, I thought it was. And so I think it's also important to make sure that you're connecting with the right people.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is also something that, my team with Harmony Strategies Group, we have been developing relationships and working with clients a lot more in the organizational space because we offer ombuds services. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with ombuds or what that is, but typically an organization who hires an ombuds is seeking to have a dedicated contract, a specific contract with a dedicated individual or group who provide those services.
I see.
So we are that outside neutral and we do outside contract services for them. So we really are the outsider, right? Some ombuds work internally as an employee, but that can be, understandably, like it can raise questions from fellow employees like, well, but you're another employee here. Like, how does that work? And they truly are neutral, but it means they just have to explain themselves a little more. And for us, we're outside. Yeah. For us, we're outside contractors. So there really is we don't report to HR. We don't report to legal. We are really this outside resource, kind of like the employment assistance program, right? We're an outside resource. We have confidential conversations. And basically, if your 24-year-old self had an ombuds to turn to, you may have come to an ombuds and said, here's my situation, what should I do, so to speak, right? And the ombuds would have helped you map out what to do. But here's the thing, the ombuds would have helped you with questioning, well, what would happen if you speak to HR? What would happen next? What would happen if your supervisor gets involved? How does that affect the conversation? What happens from your perspective? What do you think happens when there's an investigation? And another thing that the ombuds can do, which is great, it's just a great part of the services. Let's say you were to turn to me, your 24-year-old self, right, were to turn to me as the ombuds and say, well, gosh, Kira, I don't really know what happens in these investigations. How would I find out without them knowing it's me? And that's where an ombuds can also help, right? That's where an ombuds can help be the conduit of information anonymously. Because then the ombuds can ask a question of HR and find out, so, hey, Mr. or Mrs. HR or Ms. HR, what is the process for an investigation? What typically happens? Who's involved? What kind of timeline does it involve? Who on the team is tapped to chime in about it, right? And that can, and then get the information back to the individual, again, in a confidential way, anonymous way. So HR would not know who the individual is who was asking these questions, but that information that really, really is important for their decision making can get back to them so that they can then strategize, you know what? Yes, I do think that this needs to be investigated, or you know what? That is not going to work for me. I may be better off trying X or Y or Z. And you know, that's where having that third party is helpful in an organizational setting. I mean, again, for the organization, it's also really helpful because many times an organization doesn't have people who are accomplished and really experts in dispute resolution. You know, many HR people themselves are like, listen, I am great. I'm very friendly. I can do the benefits. I can do the payroll. I can do like all the stuff, the hiring,
Feel
the
good
difficult
stuff.
conversation. Yeah, well, and the even the difficult conversations to let someone go. But you know, when it comes to like, okay, someone's having a difficult time with their supervisor, the supervisor sounds right, this person sounds right, like I don't know what to choose. You know, that's where having an ombud service can alleviate, I guess, the burden on HR so
Yes.
that, you know, we can help with those mediations, those difficult conversations, you know, figuring out communication styles and conflict styles, and you know, really helping so that the workflow can just, you know, be productive,
Mhm.
and not be a drain on the system. That's not necessarily what HR, and there's some fabulous HR folks, not to get me
Mhm.
wrong, but not necessarily every HR person is adept at dealing with
Right.
the conflict management specifically, and not every HR person wants to.
Right. I can see that. I can definitely understand that with the people that I know, you know, that are in HR in different companies. Um,
Sure.
One of the things that you said when it's with the individual or with the organization, that was the same, was the mapping it out and the strategy. And that I see as so important. Funny enough, that as I'm my homework today from my mastermind is to actually kind of map out a process that I want to
Mm,
include at Living Healthy List. And it's only been in the last few years that I really see where that, you know, mapping it out and that you know, mapping it out creates the strategy or brings you to the strategy. In the past, we've always been like, okay, what's your strategy? What's your strategy? And that mind map piece it was always missing.
mm,
And so I can see where, you know, personal, professional, organizations, this piece makes so much sense to me. And it's something that everybody can incorporate into, you know, their lives, whether, you know, they're having conflict with, you know, their 16-year-old child, because we all go through those, don't we? You know,
yeah.
or our parent, our spouse, you know, whomever it might be, you know, even on a small level, you know, those things do add up and they create the stress and increase the cortisol, which is, you know, for women, and I know this because I am a woman, you know, you know, as those go, you know, as the cortisol levels go up, I'm not, you know, I don't sleep, or, you know,
Yeah.
and, you know, you get
Yeah.
to a certain age and those cortisol levels are up, you know, hormones just go bonkers.
Yeah.
And all of that creates a cycle where, you know, you're not sleeping, you're tired, you're not thinking straight. So I really do really appreciate that concept of, you know, thinking it through, mind mapping it, and then coming up with a strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because thinking through the steps
Mhm.
gives you a sense of certainty and control. And people who come to me with conflicts often feel helpless and
Mhm.
hopeless, that they are the victims of a system or of some sort of uh, power dynamic that where they really just have no voice.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, through the course of the conversation, they are able to hone in on some areas where they actually do have some control and do have some power. And that is incredibly liberating and uplifting.
Mhm.
So, part of that mapping and strategizing is then like identifying, well, where could you have a conversation? You know, what might you be able to say in a
Mhm.
safe way, right? Where might you approach this? And then once you can hone in on that, that feels very powerful. And then you can strategize. And you, again, there's a sense of like, wow, I can control. There's so many things in life we can't control, right? To identify the few things we can just feel so beautiful, right? I mean, so and that's, by the way, you're hitting on some of the crux of what's different about coaching, any coaching
Mhm.
really, than therapy. right? That coaching is very much about setting up some goals, setting up some strategies, creating a plan.
Mhm.
And that's very sort of positive, forward thinking, where therapy is, I mean, again, people go through incredible breakthroughs through therapy. And the process isn't necessarily as like strategic, right? It's not necessarily as goal oriented. It's not, a 2 hour conversation and then you're done. You have your goal and you have your strategy and
Mhm.
you're done, right?
Yeah.
Whereas,
Till
yeah,
next week.
where exactly. Whereas, in conversations with a conflict coach, we may meet in, let's say, 2 or 3 segments of, call it a 1.5 or 2 hour conversation, but then that's it. You
Mhm.
typically have like, this is the game plan. This is what I'm going to do. Hey, this is what I'm going to do if I get derailed or they get derailed, right? To sort of test all of the different what ifs, or again, maybe not all, because that would be
But
incredibly
some.
exhaustive, but many of the likely what ifs,
Right.
right, that come to mind. And then the person comes away really feeling poised, really feeling ready. Of course, they can always come back again if for whatever reason it doesn't go the way they want, and they kind of need a second or a third, opportunity to plan ahead and create a new roadmap or a new set of goals. But again, it's much more forward thinking.
Mhm. I think that's
Yes.
so important. It really is. Thank you for all of this great information, because I think most of us just kind of just deal with, we don't deal with the situation. We just kind of push it aside until it becomes a major kind of blowout. And so this really gives people the opportunity to, okay, step back and think things through much clearer, and without,
Yeah.
with less emotion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, not to say that we don't address the emotions, because the emotions definitely play a part,
Mhm.
but being able to clearly identify the emotions and the impact that they're having on the conflict already means that you have certain ownership of the emotions rather than having them hijack you. That's the key.
Mhm. Thank you so much. This has been great information. Kira, tell people where they can find you, if they are looking to hire someone if they're really in a place where they need that third party. Please tell us where that they can find you, and I'll make sure that that information is on in our show notes as well.
Oh, great. Perfect. So the best way is to check out harmonystrategies.com. That's our website. So www.harmonystrategies.com. People can also email me, Kira, that's Kira, at harmonystrategies.com. We have all the social media going on. If folks do a search for Harmony Strategies Group, they will find the LinkedIn and the Facebook and the Twitter, all the stuff. And I do encourage people, by the way, rather than like run to the email or book an appointment right away, take a look at the website, find out what resources may be out there first. It's always great when people say, hey, I've read this book, or I have that particular resource, and I just like to have some guidance in how this might be applied in my particular situation. Because that's the thing, a lot of folks look for trainings or they read great books, but they struggle with how to apply it
Mhm.
in their
So
particular
true.
situation. So it's really helpful if folks already have done
Mhm.
some homework, right? Maybe you've checked out a YouTube video clip, or you've gone to it, you heard a TED talk or something like that, and a little bit about, conflict management, and now you really want to coach, or you really want to do a deep dive. That is awesome, and that's wonderful. And thank you for inviting me to share my website and all the social media. It's always really helpful.
Absolutely. Now that's, truly that is what we are here for, Living Healthy List, but specifically on the Wonder Series. It really is an opportunity for people to kind of wonder about what else they can do. What are the other options? Because so often we think, okay, this is it. This is our one opportunity, our one option. And there's always something else that we don't understand. And so this is this perfect opportunity. So Kira, thank you so much for being with us here on the Wonder Series. And
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
oh, absolutely. I love talking with you. Um, For those of you who are listening to our replay, thank you. You have been listening to the Wonder Series, which is brought to you by Living Healthy List. We're here every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. For more information on the Wonder Series or Living Healthy List, find us at www.livinghealthylist, like your shopping list.com. And hey, if you're interested in joining us as an expert in health, wellness, personal development, and fun, check out our website and contact me through the contact form there on livinghealthylist.com. We're here every week. Until I see you next week, next Wednesday, I leave you with this: start wondering to start living. Have a great day, everyone.